I'll share a brief amount of information in some slides which I've got for today. So over to you, John. Please unmute. Feel free to say hi.
Hi all. Good to see so many names, no faces but names. This network is similar in one sense to the Kickstart Housing Network, which was so successful. So we kind of thought it'd be best to try and get this ball rolling through some kind of collaborative approach to UK shared prosperity. So the bulk of the meeting will be Lindsay, and towards the end of it, as she says, we'll have a conversation to decide how we go forward. So enjoy.
Thank you. That was beautifully brief there, John. I'll tell you what, John, I might just as well make you a co-host, just so that we've got the dizzying power. If you need to, if I disappear for any reason, you can help with folks coming in and out of mute and all the rest of it. Okay, so I know that time is really short this morning, and it is just a welcome introduction meeting. So we're not going to drown you in information, and there hopefully will be a chance to check for any questions or comments that you've got. Please feel free to use the chat box either to introduce yourselves. Obviously, we know you're here in terms of John and I understand all the registrations, but please feel free to say hello. And if you've got any questions or comments, please stick them in the chat box. You have noticed perhaps that we're recording this meeting really just as a record of any questions, queries or comments that come through. I'm really not promising that we'll be able to get to them today or that we'll have the answer to your questions, but if you have got anything you want to say or comment, just pop it in the chat box, and we will make sure that we get back to that and come back to you. I suppose the other final bit of housekeeping, I think I'll get to it in the notes I've got, but after today, if you've registered for this meeting, which of course you have, we will assume that it's okay to contact you on email and to have this group as a collective email group, unless you tell us that you'd like to opt out for any reason. So perhaps that goes without saying, but we thought just to be super careful on data and sharing. This is the Shared Prosperity Fund Housing Network, and by joining today, you're part of it, and we make that assumption unless you tell us otherwise. Okay, so that's that. Hopefully you're all right with the chat box and all is good. Hopefully we'll get to some Q&A. I'm really not going to talk at you for very long for a couple of reasons. There's lots of unanswered questions, but equally the information is you know, thin at the moment, but growing, and we've been doing a lot of work to gather what we can for today. So hopefully you can see my slides. John Westby at Clarion, if there's any problem with those, just shout to me and let me know, and I'll take that as a recording view. And if you're, I will struggle to mute you if I can't see you by now. So please be aware if I can hear you, that everyone can hear you. Okay, right, I think that's it. So welcome. It's we're on the tip of summer, of course, and we wanted to get this in just ahead of the main summer break, but there's plenty to follow in autumn in terms of what we know and what we don't know. So this is just a starting point on information on the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which many of you will be familiar with in terms of name and how we see that going in housing. So I've got just a small number of slides, and I've just put these together really just to form my thoughts. So you will all know the very obvious that after the referendum and the Brexit vote, we began to see ahead on the horizon the demise of ERDF and ESF, all European monies which were flowing, which had a social purpose or regen purpose. And really, whatever your politics, that's just a statement of fact. So here we are now, those 2 years after Brexit, transition period's over. Of course, no more funding is coming. There is a transition period of real money in terms of European social funds still coming through the system, but it's the residue, it's the last of the funding. And many of you may be in receipt and in possession of social funds, and you will know from the contacts that you have that you're in the process of either spending those funds out and doing final reports, or applying for a last few months or year or so of funding. But that's where we are in terms of social funding. So we knew that early on, and the government quite quickly pledged to set up the UK Shared Prosperity Fund to reduce inequalities between communities. So that was part of the Conservative Manifesto in 2019, and has been touched on at various points politically since then. There haven't been loads of details on SPF, which of course is a nice abbreviation for this fund, but there has been the odd trickling through. And the most significant of those was what's called the Heads of Terms, which was released as part of the overall spending review document from Treasury late in 2020. That was 1 page of information, no more than that. But it did at least describe what the intent was for the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. So we have this final work through, and I think really my take on it is, although there are arguments about the way money in, money out to the EU, and how those monies flowed, and some of the complexity and difficulties and challenges that were undoubtedly in place in European social funding, what it did do was corral money collectively for social purposes and social good. And there are other ways to do that, but it was a nice regional and national way to do it, and focus minds on social purpose and social projects. And I think that was for the good, and probably testament to the range of networks that have set up to discuss and to position around what comes next after ESF, and to look at the Shared Prosperity Fund. Interest is high, and I think one of the reasons for that is we've all engaged in social funded projects and seen some outcomes and reported and understood the change that can make. So although the funding mechanism is going, the purpose and the appetite to keep operating in a socially funded space is clearly there and has grown in housing. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we navigate our way through that and make best use of this next iteration of social funding for social purposes. So what we know so far is through a range of limited sources, but in a nutshell, at Communities That Work, we've been undertaking quite a lot of engagement with senior civil servants, ministers, and other parliamentarians to gather information about the Shared Prosperity Fund and what we know so far. At the moment, a lot of the responses that we get are reflections of the Heads of Terms, which were already published in the spending review, or slightly moved on from those points and texts and terminology. So I choose these sentences as ones which I think are useful to know, but which are you will particularly hear mentioned if you hear any minister or the PM talking about the social fund in any way at the moment. So it's always described as place-based. There's a place-based portion and a people-based portion of the fund. So it's always described in 2 ways. And the list of places which are described as targets for the place-based portion include ex-industrial areas, deprived towns, and rural and coastal communities. There's a lot in there. At the moment, there's no specific mention of urban poor areas, which I think is interesting and I think might change. But this is the list of areas which are described as places which the government through the SPF deem will be priority areas or types of places for the SPF. The second portion of the fund, which is where the DWP are most often mentioned or come into the conversation, is going to be targeted at people, potentially wherever they live and in whatever place they are. And that will have a bespoke focus on employment and skills programs, perhaps picking up areas which mainstream government funding and programs are deemed not to be reaching, or perhaps to change the duration and type of support that's on offer. and there's an emphasis there on tailoring to local need. So these piece of information came from Mims Davis, who is Minister for Employment at the DWP, in formal response to a letter we'd sent to her around mid-June. So she's engaged with us, and we expect her to engage more. She talked about some national engagement events that have been run over the last couple of years. I know that we've been involved in various conversations with various sector bodies calling for a formal period of consultation on the SPF, so that anyone from any corner could feed in formally to the government's thinking. That's not going to happen, is my very strong guess. Time does not allow it, and there's no indication that that will happen. So we asked about that, and there was a fairly bog standard response, well, slightly nuanced, naming and listing engagement events that had taken place, which the DWP said did inform policy development of government, and they've mentioned that they might be working with MHCLG on some further roundtables, which are really by invitation only, and I suspect will be quite small affairs. And we at Communities at Work are waiting to see if we get on one of those. So I include that really just to highlight the point about consultation and the slightly arbitrary nature of further consultation. Obviously, we're pleased to be on the shortlist, but it does show that there is fairly limited capacity and appetite at the moment from government to consult widely or further on SPF. So they are going into themselves in this stage in terms of SPF and what's next. The second letter I just wanted to refer to, which again moves things on a little bit, comes from Luke Hall, a fellow minister, but in a different department at MHCLG. So he's Minister for Regional Growth and Local Government. He's quite an interesting minister, obviously, on SPF. And he replied very recently, just last week, to a further letter that we've given, and again, touched on some fairly familiar descriptions of the UK Share Prosperity Fund, what it will aim to do, mentioned levelling up, and all the rest of it. In here, I mentioned particularly his quote around the SPF operating UK-wide using the new financial assistance powers in the UK Internal Market Bill. This is not widely appreciated or understood by many of us, but what it means is the somewhat obvious that the UK Share Prosperity Fund is UK-wide, and the powers at the moment of UK SPF sit with central government, with number 10. This is vexatious to our devolved nations, and there's been a lot of questioning and questions in Parliament from Wales, Scotland, less so Northern Ireland at the moment, but basically MPs and representatives of devolved administrations asking how they will shape their portion of the SPF, and indeed how they will be allocated their portion of the SPF. So there's some real differences there between the old ESF and the new potential SPF. And it's just one to be aware of, that there are differences to how this will run, and there are some, there's political ground being fought over in terms of power and influence. Luke Hall also mentioned the funding. Again, we are waiting for the first announcement of funding SPF.
It's all right. It's all right.
Apologies if someone can mute themselves.
You made me a sandwich. Thanks.
Okay, I think I've muted everyone who was unmuted, and please just keep an eye on that for your own housekeeping. Okay, so the letter from Luke Hall talked about funding. We know that it will aim to match what came in at peak on ESF, sorry, all European funding, which was £1.5 billion a year. We strongly suspect that won't be the first announcement that's made on funding late this year. And Luke was able to confirm that the first announcement on funding will come at the spending review, probably November this year. Other point on funding is it's not yet clear whether the funding will be announced year by year, over a block of years, or up to each parliament duration. So at the moment, that could be anything between 1 and 5 years of duration announced. And our guess at the moment at Communities that Work is they might go for something in the middle. They might describe a 3-year pathway of funding on SPF, but it could potentially actually only be released year by year. But there's lots that's unknown and uncertain in that. And we look with interest to what's described in the spending review this year. The SPF in theory begins in March of next year, which is no time away in terms of government planning and for the spending review. And you'll also note that Luke talks about the UK-wide investment framework coming out later this year. That investment framework is more the policy description, the direction of travel for what they want SPF to do. And of course, the spending review is the budget to support those intents. So the only thing we really know on that investment framework is that the government is closing in on itself to work out the final details of that. We hope to obviously have a line in there, and we're pushing quite hard to keep those conversations and doors open right the way through summer into early autumn. But there will be no formal consultation on that framework and how they choose to prioritise places and people as described in the heads of terms in SPF. There's quite a lot to look out for there. We also know that it's late. The original framework was mentioned as something which would be released in spring of this year. Of course, that hasn't happened. We've now got to summer. Parliament is in recess as of last week, so no formal parliamentary business will take place now until the 6th of September. So we know that you might hear news and headlines about levelling up and the Shared Prosperity Fund, but there'll be no real parliamentary news now until early autumn at the earliest. So we know the investment framework is late, but there's nothing hugely we can do to change or influence that. It's just interesting that government has taken perhaps a little bit longer to have the conversations it needed to have internally than maybe it thought when it first stated that intent. I mentioned as well the CRF, so that's the Community Renewal Fund. So this came up in the letter from Luke Hall, and he mentioned it really somewhat off the cuff. You will know, many of you will know or have been engaged in applications to the Community Renewal Fund. This is a small, it was described as a teaser for SPF, and it came out in the spring and closed very quickly in the last couple of weeks or so. I think all the final bidding windows have closed, and bids are now with the MHCLG to decide. It wasn't huge funding, but I think about 3 million per area was allocated to try and bridge the gap between ESF gaps and SPF, and also to try out some ideas which we think might have been trailed thinking of SPF. So the Minister here was making a point that anyone who's legally constituted, including our colleagues in the social housing sector, could bid for CRF, and perhaps the hinting there that Shared Prosperity Fund won't be much different to that. However, every government source we've had, including special advisors, has been quite quick to say that the Community Renewal Fund is useful and informative, but that the Shared Prosperity Fund is considered to be quite different in, and here are some words given: design, eligibility and duration. So almost in the same sentence really, CRF is referred to, but then kind of slightly distanced from Shared Prosperity Fund and what we expect to come through there. So I think that's interesting. I think from a practical perspective, it would have been very difficult for the Community Renewal Fund to inform the thinking and shape of the Shared Prosperity Fund, certainly in year 1 or year 2, just because the timings are just impossible. They just oppose one another. You know, the CRF has barely started. It will conclude in March 22. And decisions on SPF are really being made between now and early autumn. So the timings just don't really work for those things to happen. But we hope that local authority colleagues, lead authorities and successful bidders of CRF will use that learning and will go into government and shape some thinking and experience from CRF. And we also gather that local authority colleagues, lead authorities who have been looking after CRF, intend to gather their thoughts and share that with local government, with MHCLG, the central government, towards the end of summer. So there is some sense of learning and taking what we can from CRF and informing the Shared Prosperity Fund. Okay, so last couple really of slides are about what we're doing with this information, what we know, and how we're engaging. So this is Communities at Work led activity on the Shared Prosperity Fund. I've mentioned that and shown obviously some feedback from ministers, the civil servants, senior civil servants and some special advisors. We've reached out to 16 plus individuals, named individuals amongst that cohort on SPF, and are pushing and seeking open doors to advance our view, share our position on the role of housing in the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. And over summer into autumn, we are developing with great support from colleagues amongst our membership, what we're calling a prospectus, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund prospectus, which will be a brief but a punchy document for government to show them and describe ways in which the social housing sector can be a key partner in SPF and can help to advance some of the objectives and policy framework that's laid out in SPF. So that work is well underway, but not yet published, and we aim to publish that in autumn, table that at party conferences, most notably the Conservative Party conference in October, and describe it at Housing 21, the conference coming up in early September, where it may be draft, but nonetheless thoughts will be shaped up. So that's a document that will exist, which we're developing with support from our members and through this intelligence gathering process. We've also been keeping a close eye on parliamentary questions, written and oral questions that are going in from various parliamentarians into government, typically to MHCLG to answer at the moment. And we will continue to do that. It's a very useful way of just doing a temperature check and an interest check on what's on the minds of MPs and in the Lords in terms of SPF. And that's enabled us to see some of the early issues around devolved administration's concern and the powers invested in the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. In the heads of terms, again, I'm happy to share those. They're obviously a public document. It's a bit of a wade through, but there is a single page on SPF, which was published in the Spending Review. We've gone through that, we've engaged further with government and got a little bit further in our understanding from those published heads of terms. And through our intelligence gathering, again, just to mention, these are the trends we can see: some concern from devolved administrations, total uncertainty on the type of funding and the duration, clear interest from local authorities to be at the forefront of UK Shared Prosperity Fund, understandably, but it's not clear yet how that will work. And certainly over the last few weeks, growing reluctance from ministers, more than advisors and civil servants, but growing reluctance to say anything further on SPF. So our sense as we head to summer is that there was really a closing down of public comment, any public further comment on SPF. So we think the government is trying to keep its powder dry until autumn 21, where it may choose party conference to make a big statement or seek headlines in another way, shape or form around levelling up. The other thing just to mention in terms of the other important aspect to policy and influencing is being led by an MP, Neil O'Brien MP, and he's been given by the Prime Minister a direct role in the Levelling Up Commission and the Levelling Up White Paper. So this is seen as a trailer for the UK Shared Prosperity Fund framework. So it's a chance for the government to share ideas and have them potentially kicked around by the media or by colleagues or by fellow parliamentarians before announcing their intent on the Shared Prosperity Fund. So we see it and are being hinted to see it as a trailer in terms of policy terms for the SPF. The Levelling Up white paper was only announced this year, and has sort of come as an additional runner and rider really in the Shared Prosperity Fund race. So that hasn't been published by in any way, shape or form, and we expect that to come in early autumn, or in autumn, certainly ahead of the spending review and certainly ahead of any published SPF framework. So it will be that first chance for the government to put its head over the parapet, describe its thinking and see what happens, see if it gets shot down. So it's well worth noting the Levelling Up white paper is coming. And again, there is some uncertainty on how that's being shaped, but we've written directly to Neil O'Brien and expect to meet with him in early autumn, certainly not over summer. Okay, so that brings us to today, to the Shared Prosperity Fund Housing Network. This came about obviously in partnership with Clarion and being aware of the Kickstarting Housing Network, which they'd helped to pull together, which was a good and recent example of the sector coming together either for information and or for bidding purposes. So both of those things are relevant and valid. And we wanted to get the housing sector together around the topic of the Shared Prosperity Fund. So today is the first opportunity to do that, and really is a welcome meeting. I would expect us to set a few more meetings through autumn, which of course will be opt-in, and everyone here will be cordially invited to join those in a similar format to this. Hopefully they'll be more discursive and we will get some conversation or plan some questions in advance from you guys and try and deal with them. But this, we wanted to get this side of the main summer break, just to let you know that we're up and running. It is an open forum. It is naturally designed for the housing sector, but it's not really closed to anyone. We, of course, run it through the membership drive of Communities That Work and with the links to the Kickstart Housing Network that John Westby holds with Clarion. We've brought those two contacts together and are growing it. So these are the purposes, as we see it, of the network. Obviously, a bit of intel sharing, a bit of qualified gossip sharing on the Shared Prosperity Fund, but also to help us at Communities That Work gather some intelligence, possibly case studies, working examples that we might need for that prospectus work, which I described, that sort of written submission into government around the role of housing and the unique opportunity for the government to work with housing in the Shared Prosperity Fund. So this will be a great port of call for that, in addition to our membership. It will help us to show capacity there, and of course it will help to collaborate. John, do come in at this point. I can't see you at the moment, but hopefully you're still there and I haven't bored you to sleep. To just talk about your views in terms of contacts. I've talked about that, so we will assume your consent for John and I to use your contact email from today onwards, unless you tell us you want to opt out. But John, any views on further down the line, of course, but your views on the bidding capacity on Shared Prosperity Fund, I think from Clarion's perspective, and perhaps any planning, what colleagues could do from today onwards or to think about over summer in readiness for any as yet unknown bidding capacity.
Thanks, Lindsay. I can see you, fortunately, but most people can't see me, which is probably also fortunate. Yeah, I mean, there have been other conversations around UKSPF, some different regional networks that I've been party to. And the general view that we have at Clarion is a sort of regional approach. I think in one sense, we don't know how this is going to play out down the line, but there are a lot of fairly strong networks. And it's capitalizing on those networks, really. So we can, as Lindsay said, pull case studies together, shared experience, anything that sort of comes out, and get us prepared, really, for anything that's thrown at us. In terms of bidding, we don't know what's going to happen going forward. Obviously, with Kickstart, it was fairly straightforward in one sense, but in this, we just don't know what's going to go forward. So I think we need to best place ourselves. And what I'd like, if possible, is for people to sort of put their hands up to maybe lead regional areas. But there's no set regions, particularly around the country, but there are a number of, as networks that do operate. So if people have an appetite to work regionally and share experience and share knowledge, that'd be really helpful, I think. And we can, Lindsay and I can put that together and cascade that through the groups. It might be easier. I mean, I think the links with local authorities and links with you know, your local area, who you think are useful to you. Those are the things to do, I think. And also clearly the voluntary sector, because it's going to be aimed at the community at large, and clearly those voluntary sector links are quite key. So I think if you work as you obviously do already, as close as possible, and share knowledge of what's going on here with those groups, because the voluntary sector will also want to know what's in it for them down the line. And clearly, if we can help guide them in some way, maybe through CVS and the like, that's also quite useful. So I see the network having different things it can do to sort of involve as many people as possible in the knowledge sharing. And I would certainly welcome any people come towards me and see how they can help Lindsay and myself to cascade this out and get as much knowledge as possible going forward.
Yeah, thanks, John. Either of our contacts are fine, aren't they, for this network, so we can compare notes and engagement. John, if you get a chance to just check the chat box before me, please do, and just cover off. I've got sort of, I think, one closing point to make, and then we'll see where we can get in the chat box. So John, if you can get ahead of that, that's great. I haven't had a chance to look in the chat box yet, so apologies to anyone who may have said something really key. I'll try and come back to it and cover it. I think the only other thing I wanted to add really is, in terms of preparedness, understanding, of course, where you are, where your localities are, is key. If you read the Heads of Terms document, which is a one-pager, which we will share across this network, there's nothing to stop you as an organisation now really thinking about where your hotspot places might be that fits that very, very broad series of stated targets for the Shared Prosperity Fund, and indeed where your populations and communities of particular need might be geographically or by density. To just understand, so that you could look at a regional map of areas in which you operate and know where your priority areas are, and how, if you overlaid those with the very briefest information that we have on the Shared Prosperity Fund right now, you could see where there might be overlap and a good agreement between those two sources of information. And I think whichever way the Shared Prosperity Fund goes, I think local authorities will have an exceptionally key role to play. And I think as a sector, there is some amazingly good practice of working hand in glove with local authorities, but there's an awful lot of ambivalent or fairly flat examples of partnership, and that's in no way a criticism of any side of that relationship. But I think building relationships with local authorities, as difficult and as challenging as that can be, for a whole range of reasons, both political and resource driven, I would say please don't forget it. I don't think we'll be able to do SPF without them, and we may well argue for particular social housing control or a corralling of a portion of SPF funding to work through housing, but I wouldn't at any point expect the SPF to be written across and handed over to the social housing sector en bloc. So we know we're going to have to work in partnership, and that's something that the social housing sector is actually exemplary at doing. So we may need to be on the front foot there and have our hand out first to make those connections with local authorities. But I just want to emphasise that. And I think, speaking of partnership, probably, oh yes, the very last point I wanted to make is a huge thanks, of course, to I think about 2/3 of organisations who signed up today are already members of Communities at Work, which is a big thanks to you, because we cannot run this work and make these presentations to government and arguments without your support. And to the third or so of you who are working in housing who may not yet be a member of Communities at Work, we would love to count you in, and that will help us. Your support will directly help us to do this work. So I couldn't resist a Zoom webinar with 100+ registrations and not mention our lovely membership organisation. I'll drop a quick note to any organisations that aren't members to let you know about a summer offer that we're going to have to get you guys joined up. We're running a members only webinar this Friday, so that's very soon, but that will be clues in the name, it's members only, and we'll talk further about SPF and also have a guest speaker join. So I just wanted to make sure our members don't forget that one. It's on the very cusp of summer, I know, but we're holding that. And we will have hopefully a ministerial reception presence at Housing 21 on the 8th of September. All Communities at Work members will be cordially invited to join us for a drink and a nibble and a chat with special advisors, colleagues from MHCLG and a minister or two. And we'd of course welcome any new members to that event as well. So I just wanted to mention that. More info will come very shortly in terms of a formal invitation to that reception, but it will take place as part of the Housing 21 conference in Manchester in early September. Following that, there'll be the Conservative Party conference, which we will be at with a small presence of people, but some very key Conservative leads on the Shared Prosperity Fund, where we hope to really press palms and move the prospectus that we're developing now into the minds of government decision makers ahead of formal announcements. So that's our work as we see it over summer, autumn. So huge, big thanks to all our existing members, and if you're not yet with us, please think about it. I know where you live now, so I will come and say hello. John.
Annabelle, I noticed your hand is up.
Oh, thank you, John. Yeah, please, Annabelle, do come in and introduce yourself, please.
Okay, I'm Annabelle Palmer, Director of Community Investment and Care at Southern Housing Group. So lovely to see people. It's really exciting, isn't it? Hello, Lindsay and John, and thank you so much for that. It was really, really informative. I've got a couple of questions or thoughts, I suppose. So everything you've said and everything that's out there is directly aligning this to the levelling up agenda. But of course, for many of us, we work in areas that are kind of through those earlier funding rounds and what have you, not part of the prioritised areas under the levelling up agenda. So bless them, if you're on the Isle of Wight, you're buggered, kind of thing. So I guess there's a sort of a question or a thought or a view around, is this directly aligned to levelling up, and what do we do about the rest of those areas that would have received funding through EU funding but are going to be excluded, probably, really, realistically, through this? So that's one question, thought, whatever. And the second is, it's fantastic that you two are hosting and coordinating this. Obviously, Lindsay, your focus is employment, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this funding is around just employment. And I guess it's thoughts around what do colleagues think, or is there something we should be thinking about which is outside of that environment? So there are my couple of thoughts for you.
Lovely, thanks, Annabelle, and it's lovely to see you as well. Welcome. John, do you have any initial thoughts, or I'm happy to?
I'd agree with what Annabelle was saying, and this is going to cover them far more than education and training, and there's a whole raft of stuff. So Clarion has put in bids for all our activities to response funding, and I think that's the thing to watch out for. It's a different animal, and we need to understand a bit more down the line how the animal's going to work, and how they're going to integrate some of these themes, because they inevitably will integrate as well as keep them separate in some way, shape or form. So the bidding information is going to be very interesting when it comes out, and how we actually understand that. And that's where we can share some of the ideas, I think, as to what we see that comes along down the line. That's my sort of next point of thought. And you're right. I think some areas will lose out from this in some senses, and we kind of do need to find out down the line for more information about which areas that they might be, and clearly, I'm sure through Lindsay's good services, ask questions about what is in it for organisations that sit in regions that aren't going to benefit from the fund. So it's not clear yet. but they're good questions to ask.
Yeah. I would concur with John's points and probably add a couple of thoughts. I've just been madly looking for some notes, and I'll put something more clearly in a follow-up note and an email to everyone from the network today. But this SPF that does talk about places and people, and they're clearly different, but there will be priorities set within those. Even in the earliest indications of the Shared Prosperity Fund, there is concern that the urban poor areas are not mentioned, that coastal, rural, ex-industrial and deprived towns, not cities, towns, are all mentioned. And so there's already that sense that there'll be some areas included more than others, or there'll be some areas really excluded from SPF, but it's not clear yet what that looks like. On the people side of the fund, it is the drivers are around employment and skills and opportunity. So although I talked about those two parts of the fund, the places side will definitely be more than just about employment. The people side at the moment looks like it is going to focus on employment, skills, opportunity. So there's a bit of a juggle between those two priorities, and it will be interesting to see how that shakes down into any kind of bidding opportunity. You know, what will they actually ask for at the end of the day that is accountable now? So lots of uncertainty, but I take the point. And the other area, confusingly enough, the government announced an infrastructure-led, really, levelling up fund a few months ago, which is local authority driven, and that replaces other types of regeneration and infrastructure funding which have been around typically as grants for local authorities for a number of years. But the levelling up fund exists, and that is more, crudely put, it's roads, roundabouts, bridges, that kind of accessibility, community infrastructure, enabling economic pathways and movement to be created or supported. That exists, that money's out there, and it's considerable. I think it's between £3 and £4 billion has been committed to that already. So there is an infrastructure fund. It's local authority led, and it's already been announced. But confusingly, it's called the Levelling Up Fund, and the Levelling Up white paper, which Neil O'Brien is leading, is going to talk about the social fund aspect of levelling up, and actually has probably very little to do with roundabouts, railways and bridges. So there's already a bit of a naming confusion at government, and everyone wanting to put the label levelling up on anything, any pound that goes through the door of government, and that's caused confusion already. So I hope that beds down and doesn't continue to cause confusion, but we'll see. The levelling up white paper will be very interesting in terms of the naming terms it uses for the interventions it's going to describe that it wants. I know that's all a bit sort of nerdy dull, but we always need to get our naming conventions right so the government understand what we're talking about. It's all got a bit loose and swervy over spring, summer. So I mentioned that, but the points you make are dead right, Annabelle. So, and we watch with interest and try to influence in terms of housing's role across the fund. But yeah, for us, our focus is employment, skills, jobs, opportunity.
Hugo, I see your hands up.
Oh, thanks, John.
Yeah, sorry, you will have seen in the chat, there's a number of this is Hugo from Optivo, a number of us have been sharing what areas we cover. Just Lindsay, a prompt to see if you can,
Thank you.
have a think about how we can organize ourselves a bit, because there'll be an emphasis on regions, and if we all know what local enterprise partnerships are doing in those areas, what councils are more active, who has contacts with whom, the housing associations have talked to one another about what approaches we're taking. All of that groundwork will be useful the day debate opens. And so apart from the conversations as a group, email exchanges or smaller discussions in regions with your assistance on how to shape that would be most welcome.
Thank you, Hugo. John, any early thoughts there?
No, I think suggestions will be very welcome, because as I say, there's no regional map we can tie ourselves to. So any suggestions that you make will be taken with interest. so we can actually come up with maybe some regional approaches and who works with who, in which there are regional organizations already, and some of those regions cross over to each other potentially. So we do need to come up with some kind of pragmatic mapping going forward in some way, shape or form. It's not essential, but it would be really useful going forward, I think, that we're able to talk in that way, particularly if you're going to talk to local politicians representing your regional. So think about in that point of view, you know, that if you can say you represent a group, clearly the network overall, but also, you know, a particular region is also, I think, a good way forward. Yes, Hugo.
I think that was a thumbs up from Hugo.
All right, okay, thumb rather than hand.
Yeah, but I would hope, I mean, going back to Annabelle's point, we don't yet know which regions, beyond the description of what a priority area looks like, we don't yet know whether there will be a list of 100, 200, 300 named places in which SPF is considered a priority, or that funding will flow first. And that if they make that decision, that's politically fraught with difficulty. It got a bumpy enough reception in the Community Renewal Fund, which was a very small sum of money, one-off. If they take that route for SPF, there'll be some real challenges, but they may choose to do it. And of course, that will start to describe regions and places and areas where you may be, where our members sit and the network resides, and we will start to understand where hotspots might be for the Shared Prosperity Fund, and therefore what information we need to gather most urgently to describe the role of housing, the opportunity to work with housing in those areas or with those communities that are part of our purview. So there will be a lot of preparing to do. It's not clear yet whether funding will be described, will be set by government using a formula, using some kind of deprivation formula, and simply worked out across regions and nations and given to local authorities. That's possible. It's not clear whether there'll be an open national competitive round, but focused on particular areas, or it's not clear that local authorities will get an allocation and they will be tasked with running a competition in their local areas to decide the proper use of those funds. None of that is certain. All of those things are possible, or something which kind of cuts and shuts those ideas together. So we await the funding news with interest. But if there is an opportunity to bid, and my guess is there will be an opportunity to bid, knowing what you've got, it's often described as a boilerplate response, you know, something that you've got which describes your organisation, its offer, its track record, its focus is very useful to have. And John, I hope, without sort of adding to your plans particularly, but as regional groups come together, and I see the chat box has got loads of great sort of hands up and people saying they're interested, which is fantastic. As we start to knit that together into an SPF housing network, that we might be able to share information across regions, towns or areas to help with that, so that we can each have those boilerplate responses tailored but solid and up to a certain standard, so that we can all use those and deploy those in bidding opportunities as they come, be that by single towns or by collective regions or nationally, as the funding opportunity becomes clearer. But that occurs to me as an area that we could start to sort of get ahead on, John. Does that feel reasonable?
Yeah, I'd agree. Stock profiles, all that kind of stuff, very useful. It's very useful. I did do a bit of that with the Kickstart network to start with on stock profiles, but down the line it wasn't needed. But I think in this case, I will set out some kind of boilerplate approach to this, I think, to so we can sort of we can get a real handle on what's out there and how we can work together.
Yeah. Okay. So what we might do then following this is obviously a hello email to everyone who registered. I'll share a link to the heads of terms, which I've talked about a couple of times, just so you can have a look. Maybe some early indicators of information to either start thinking about or start supplying, which John just mentioned. So John, if you share those. And I think what we will do is set a date for an autumn regathering following today, where hopefully we can move the detail along, what we've learned from our summer expeditions into government, waking up civil servants, now their ministers have gone back to their constituencies, and see where the Levelling Up white paper is and what the direction of travel is on Share Prosperity Fund. So I would suggest September for that meeting, and I'll liaise, John, with you on a reasonable time, and we will hope, of course, that it hits as many diaries as possible. We'll record as we have today so that people can step in and catch up if they need to, and of course we'll keep everyone here on the email list, irrespective of whether or not you can make a meeting. So to follow will be a September date, some early indicator information you might want to think about for your organisation or region from John and the heads of terms link from today. So that's to follow. And just to pick up, I will also pick up, I'll separately share some information. I saw a query or two on membership of communities that work. I will share information on that offer to non-members from today, so that you can see what that is. And if you're happy to proceed with that, that would be brilliant. But the two things are separate in terms of you can be in this network without being a member of communities that work, but you hurt my feelings instantly. So, only joking.
Don't hurt her feelings, whatever you do.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so those two things are separate, and we'll make sure that everyone gets the follow-up they need. But that's that. Okay, if there are any more thoughts or queries, please raise your hand, or if not, we've got the chat box to go through, so we will know any comments or offers of help in there. Huge thanks, I'm sure, from John as well as me for those, and showing such enthusiasm for that today. I hope that's been a helpful whistle through where we are with the SPF, what we know and what we don't know. And we'll certainly keep you posted with a gathering again for this network in September, date to be confirmed, probably within the first 2 weeks of September. But thank you for coming in such good numbers. That assures me, I think, that the housing sector is serious about the Share Prosperity Fund, does see it as an opportunity, as it rightly is. And I think we could do something together as a sector that's very powerful and is genuinely unique in this country in terms of what we can offer the government in Share Prosperity Fund. And I don't say that glibly, it's true. We just need to make the case. Okay, well, without further ado, it's
thanks for me as
really
well.
summertime, so have a lovely summer. If you're a member, I might see you on Friday at Communities at Work's members only webinar. That's at 11:30. If not, have a lovely few weeks off. I hope you get some time off over summer, and thank you for joining us today. And John, massive thanks. If you have any last word, John, it's yours.
No, that's all. Just a thanks to all of you for coming in to offering your support. Really good.
Yeah. Ditto. Okay, thanks everyone, take care and have a lovely summer break if I don't see you before. Bye guys, bye.